The most infamous scandal in the history of football happened not so long ago. Less than 2 decades ago, the most shocking news came out of the Serie A when the Italian league was at the height of its popularity. It led to Juventus being relegated to Serie B with their star-studded squad. In 2006, Italy had one of the best summers imaginable in football after winning the World Cup against France. That summer saw people come out onto the streets as the World Cup trophy was paraded around. But the mood around the nation had just started to get sour a couple of months ago. In May 2006, newspapers published transcripts of conversations between Luciano Moggi and Pierluigi Pareto from their phone calls made in 2004. Luciano Moggi was the General Director at Juventus and Pareto was the head of Italian football's refereeing association. The conversation between the two was about which referees to pick for certain upcoming matches for Juventus in Serie A as well as the Champions League. But this was just the start of what would snowball into a full-on scandal involving major clubs from the Serie A and a few clubs in Serie B. Point deductions were handed out like candies and titles were stripped away. The Calciopoli scandal started the fall of Italian football. Let us unravel the scandal and try to understand how one of the biggest leagues in the world managed to harbor cheating on such a large scale. We'll also look at the aftermath of the scandal and why it's considered to be the worst in Italian football history. Even before the wiretaps were publicly reported, Juventus were under investigation for alleged doping in the 90s. As the ongoing investigation continued, new information came to light regarding the match-fixing antics. At the heart of the scandal was Luciano Moggi, whose influence and reputation went beyond his post as the General Director of Juventus. His son, Alessandro Moggi, ran the largest company of agents in Italian football called GEA World. As the phone wiretaps were made public and the conversations were published in the newspapers, a quiet storm started brewing. Keep in mind that these revelations were coming out mere weeks before the World Cup in 2006. It soon revealed that the Italian Football Federation had been handed the wiretap conversations months ago in February, but they didn't do anything about it. The investigation turns towards GEA World as there are suspicions of coercion and abuse of power to the point of violence being threatened from Luciano and Alessandro Moggi. With over 40 Serie A players on their accounts, as well as 3 Serie A presidents and many well-renowned coaches, GEA World is accused of using intimidation and coercion to employ new clients in order to widen their reach and influence in the league. This would give Luciano Moggi the right tools to manipulate Serie A to his liking. Further allegations are made against Moggi and the company that they made some players deliberately underperform against Juventus in the past. This increasing pressure on Juventus forces the whole board to send in their resignation. It's hard to determine an exact date when this scandal might have become so obvious that an investigation must have started. The wiretap conversations that were made public in May came much later than the beginning of an internal investigation. The suspicions had started in the middle of the 2005-06 season, and if we had to pick the exact moment when it became all too apparent, it would be the 12th of February 2006. On this day, Inter took on Juventus at home, and the title was up for contention at this point, with both clubs vying for it. Inter lost the game 2-1, and there was a huge outcry about the decisions made by the referee that day, especially a dubious free kick gifted to Juventus that led to one of their goals. The rumor mill of a scandal brewing behind the scenes started gaining traction right after this game. This game was later flagged in the Calciopoli investigation, and it was revealed that the referee had been previously intimidated to take decisions in favor of Juventus on other occasions as well. Italian football is no stranger to dodgy scandals and corruption. They have a history of misdealings when it comes to football, dating back to the inception of the game. Most of you might not know or remember Luciano Moggi, so think of him like the Italian Fiorentino Perez of his time, the godfather of Italian football, without whose approval no transfer could take place. AC Milan, Fiorentina, Regina, Arezzo, and Lazio were also included in allegations of corruption and match fixing through their respective club executives. But Juventus remained the major culprit, having won the majority of titles in recent years. There were 3 major ways in which Juventus would be given privileges over the rest of the league through corrupt and coerced officials. The first was to pick certain referees that Moggi knew would favour the club in small or 50-50 calls on the pitch. The second was much more blatant and direct, as a few referees were instructed to make calls in favour of Juventus in important games that could decide the title. This was evident against Inter in February 2006. The third measure, it had to do with unfairly suspending players of other teams in such a way that when they play against Juventus in a subsequent match, it would be an easier task for the old lady to win. As the rulings were being processed and disclosed, Juventus won the 2005-06 Serie A on the 14th of May. Marcello Lippi, the Italian national team coach, was also questioned in connection to Moggi allegedly having phone calls with him and asking to spare Juventus players from national team duty to be available for the club. But Lippi denied these allegations and stated the GEA world did not influence him, even though his son did in fact work there. In the last week of June, after reports were submitted by the prosecutors, it was suggested that all clubs found guilty of match fixing should be directly demoted to the second tier of Italian football. The clubs in question were Juventus, AC Milan, Fiorentina, and Lazio. The prosecutors demanded heavy sanctions on the four clubs. They proposed that Juventus should be sent to the third division, while Lazio, Fiorentina, and AC Milan should be relegated to the second division. Apart from these demotions, heavy point deductions were proposed as well. Italy has reached the semi-finals at this point and goes on to defeat Germany 2-0 to book their place in the final against France. After winning the finals in Berlin, the country had a bittersweet reaction as they were in the midst of a humiliating scandal that had already affected the image of Italian football. A week after the World Cup win, the consequences of this long scandal were announced. Juventus were to be relegated to Serie B for the 2006-07 season, which meant that a fair few World Cup winners would play at least one season in the second tier of Italian football. They were also to be deducted 30 points in advance for the following season. Apart from the demotion and deduction, Juventus were stripped of their last two Serie A titles for their role in the match-fixing scandal. Fiorentina and Lazio were also told that they would be demoted to Serie B with point deductions of 12 and 7 points respectively. But barely 2 weeks later, these punishments were revised after the clubs appealed for a reduced sentence. After the appeal, Fiorentina and Lazio were reinstated in Serie A with 19 and 11 points to be deducted in their following campaign. AC Milan's point deduction went from 15 points down to 8 points. Juventus were handed the worst punishments, and deservedly so. They were to start their next campaign in Serie B, but their minus 30 point deduction went down to 17 points. While these four clubs received the majority of the brunt, Regina were initially deducted 15 points, which was reduced to 11. They were also fined €100,000. The clubs affected were obviously in low spirits, with many innocent players and executives also roped into the consequences. But the most affected were their respective fans, who felt humiliated. Juventus fans would face further embarrassment in the very first Serie B match against Rimini. The relatively smaller club would hold the Italian giants to a 1-1 draw. The fans quickly felt their humiliation turn into anger. They wanted to be bigger than this setback. They did not want to be defined by their shortcomings and a corruption scandal that they had no hand in. The Italian scandal was as close to a mafia movie as you might expect. The aftermath of Calciopoli would be felt for years to come, and the image of Italian football was tarnished. Luciano Moggi was unsurprisingly handed a lifetime ban. After Juventus was stripped of the 2005-06 title, Inter were awarded the title. This was heavily protested by the Juventus hierarchy, and the intense rivalry would continue. Ibrahimovic and Vieira left for Inter, while Thuram and Zambrotta made their way to Barcelona. Cannavaro joined Real Madrid. A few faithful remained and led Juventus back to Serie A in the first campaign itself, even though they faced a points deduction. These loyal players would be held in high regard in the eyes of fans, and some big names including Buffon, Chiellini, Del Piero, Nedved, and Trezeguet. The team was managed by Didier Deschamps that year. On their return to Serie A in 2007-08, Juventus would come third, with Inter winning the title to rub salt in the old lady's wounds. Since then, Juventus returned to glory again and won many trophies before recently being docked 10 points again for financial irregularities and misdealings in the transfer market. They found themselves in hot water once again and need to restructure their ways in today's football world. The time of underhanded dealings is over in football, and clubs need to cater for the new ways. So what do you think about the biggest scandal in recent history? Were the sentences fair, or should there have been even bigger consequences for match fixing? Let us know in the comments below.